Well, for more on this visit by Mohammed bin Salman to the White House, I'm now joined on the line from Washington by Hussein Ibish, who is Senior Resident Scholar at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C. First of all, welcome to the programme. Thank you so much for joining us here on France 24. We do appreciate it. We've got a lot to get through. Maybe I could begin by, it was talked about there in our short film, this big subject of the sale of US F-35 fighter jets. And it was alluded to in our report that in the Middle East, only Israel, with its very key relationship to the United States, has ever been sold these F-35s. Is Israel worried? Should they be worried? I think there's actually a US law that says Israel must have a quantitative technological and military edge in the Middle East. How is Trump going to go around all that?
Qualitative, not quantitative. A qualitative military edge over any and all potential adversaries. Now, the question is Saudi Arabia a potential adversary of Israel? And I think it's very hard to make the case under current circumstances. You know, try to draw a scenario in which Saudi Arabia and Israel come to blows. I think it's virtually impossible. So I don't think the Israelis are going to be too bothered about this, except for the more hysterical among them. I think the calmer minds in Israel will realize that Saudi Arabia is not going to be turned into a regional military powerhouse by the addition of F-35s. There'll be a lot of conditions placed on their usage, and it is going to be a lot of American control left at the end of the day if the sale does go through. So no, I don't think Israel is going to have anything to worry about here.
One of the other things that's expected, perhaps, is that some sort of security pact might be signed between Saudi Arabia and the US. You know, this a little because Saudi Arabia was a bit spooked by what happened in Qatar. After that, after the Israelis bombed Qatar, Trump set up a pact with Qatar saying you attack Qatar, you attack us. Is that what this security pact with Saudi Arabia might look like? Take us through it.
That's not what the Saudis have been looking for. They were a lot spooked by that. All the Gulf countries were, because it just emphasized how vulnerable they all are and how much they still need American protection. If not after, then at least before, restraining Israel as a potential threat, and you know, at least to Qatar, not to Saudi Arabia and the UAE. But you know, it just shows that these are countries that are vulnerable to adversaries. All right, now the Saudis under Biden were looking for a comprehensive new mutual defense treaty, similar to the one the U.S. signed with Japan in the early 50s. And they came very close to finalizing that with the Biden administration, but it was going to require some cooperation from Israel on the Palestinian front. And now the Saudi conditions, the terms that Saudi Arabia would need to get for the Palestinians, have gone up since the Gaza war. They really need Israel to recognize that Palestinians ultimately have the right to a state between the river and the sea in historical Palestine, in the lands currently occupied by Israel. And the Israelis are in no mood to do that. And it's not just Netanyahu, it's all of Israel that's in no mood to even contemplate it in theory. So it's really off the table. So what they might get is something like the Qataris got, an executive order that's good as long as the current president says it's good, and interpreted in the way the current president wants to interpret it. It's nothing like a Senate-ratified treaty. That's what they really wanted. They're not going to get that. The other side of it was a strategic alignment agreement. They might get something similar there too, but again, not ratified. So it's not what they've been looking for. Nice if you can get it, but not really that valuable.
Aside from these defence issues, there's going to be a lot of business, commercial deals, they both hope. If we take it from both sides, what do the Saudis want from Washington in terms of commercial things? I know there's been talk of artificial intelligence, nuclear, civil energy.
No.
Maybe you could talk to us about those two areas.
Yes. I think you mentioned the two biggest ones other than the military hardware, which we've discussed. One is AI, chips for AI. right? So NVIDIA chips, the UAE has been promised the highest level of NVIDIA chips. They're having a very hard time getting them. So in other words, an agreement to sell them does not translate very, there's many a slip between cup and the lip there. But the Saudis would like access to at least the second tier or third tier or something like that of NVIDIA chips, if not the first tier. So they would like that. They want to go into AI in a big way, following, again, the lead of the UAE, as often happens. And so that's a big deal. The other is the nuclear front. Saudi Arabia believes it has a good deal of uranium that it wants to mine. It wants to use that uranium for domestic electricity so that it can sell its oil overseas as long as oil is being purchased. Now, they would like to do that in conjunction with the U.S. so as not to have this irritate relations. But the Americans are insisting on a 1-2-3 agreement, which is not suitable to a country that mines its own uranium. It's basically for countries that would purchase uranium on the open markets. So one of the solutions that's being floated is that if the U.S. were to throw a kind of a de facto nuclear umbrella over Saudi Arabia, a nuclear protection agreement, that then Saudi Arabia would agree to forego enrichment and accept something like a 1-2-3 arrangement, which wouldn't make as much economic sense, but would at least get them protection from nuclear blackmail from a potentially nuclearized Iran, or, I don't know, conceivably from Israel or Russia, China, India, who knows, They currently just signed a pact with Pakistan, which is an effort to move in that direction, a baby step. What they really want is American protection. So if the Americans give them that protection, they might agree to a economically disadvantageous nuclear agreement, and that is a big possibility. It's a little bit of a long shot, but it's definitely in the air. It's floating out there in the ether.
We don't have a lot of time, so perhaps a very quick answer, and then I'd like to move on to the Khashoggi affair. What does Trump want from Saudi Arabia? You can probably say it in a short sentence.
Money.
There we are. Okay. So let's move on then. Back in 2018, this global outcry after the death of Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist, the Saudi Arabian journalist who was a big government critic. Does the US no longer care about this? I have heard that Trump... Trump didn't make a big deal of it at the time when he was in office in 2018.
So let's go back. Let's go back to the murder of Jamal. And first of all, I need to say he was a friend of mine for 15 years, and a pretty good friend. I mean, I would see him, dine with him a couple times a year at least, if not more. And I was very shocked by his murder, and it hurt me badly. At the time, Trump protected MBS. He said, who knows who did it? We don't know. The whole world was clear what had happened. But Trump later said between the first and second Trump administration about MBS, forgive the language, I saved his ass. And I think that's true. I think if Trump had turned on MBS, it would have made it difficult for him to continue as the heir apparent in Saudi Arabia. It would have at least made it much harder. And Trump didn't make an issue of it. He was probably the only major figure in the world who didn't. However, it still was the case that MBS was persona non grata in the U.S. for a while. The main inflection point was when Biden, after the Ukraine war began, Biden went to Jeddah to meet with the Saudis and other Gulf countries and the Jordanians and the Egyptians and what have you. And there was a famous fist bump between Biden and MBS in Jeddah. And that was the big inflection point. That meant that MBS was back in with the White House, not because everybody loves him, but because Saudi Arabia and the U.S. need each other. And they don't have alternatives to each other. So they put these things, I mean, it's a horrible murder, but it's one murder. And in the realm of raison d'etat, it's not decisive. Even though it was my friend who was murdered. I mean, that's just a fact. And I think enough time has gone by that more and more people, Democrats, liberals, are getting beyond it and saying, okay, we just have to move on.
Absolutely. I'm going to have to stop you there. Thank you so much. Really interesting. Hussein Ibish, senior resident at the Arab Gulf States Institute in Washington, D.C.